But there was a company that you could actually create your own monopoly board based on your own things. So one of the things I wanted to do was, and I did it. I got you get enough properties, enough so that you can make your own monopoly board. So you put your best one in your portfolio as Mayfair.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Next Level Finance podcast. As you can see, unlocking financial freedom, and we've got a special guest today, the king of commercial property, Ranjan Bhattacharya. Ranjan,
good to see you.
Thank you for having us.
Good to see you.
And as you're going to see, the value is going to be huge. So please do like and comment below on anything that you want more answers to, or you want more detail, or what you've enjoyed. We're going to get into all the fun. Ranjan, thank you for coming down. And I've been excited. I've been talking about this for ages to get, I've been mentioning it on our Baker Street highlights and all over the place. Because loads of people look at yourself, including myself and many others, to get inspiration to get involved in property, especially, as I call you, the king of commercial property, because that's where you've made quite a big name across the world.
I think I do all sorts in property, probably done a little bit of everything. And sometimes I think in this world, people like to pigeonhole people. So yes, I'm pigeonholed for commercial, but plenty of other stuff, HMOs, room lets, vanilla buy-to-let, auction purchases, flips, the whole lot really.
I think it comes down to, it's like everyone, people know me, for example, for property, tax, accounting, that's like our niche, we're areas that we focus a lot on, but that doesn't mean we don't do a lot of other stuff. And I think that's pretty much for yourself, especially with what we're going to get into the content, what's been happening in the world. That's where you've made huge value for yourself and many others. So we're going to get into, we have a certain layout as we were talking before and having chat, looking forward to the meal later as well, and people will be seeing some snips.
I'm starving.
I do feed them, I promise. Hospitality is big. It is, Ranjan,
we're going to go large on the fries this time, isn't it? On meal number 3.
This is what I mean. When I get these celebrities coming in, they're always having the jokes, but they love the hospitality that Sir Tax and myself always provide. All right. I want to talk about one of the things, because for me it's so big. We've tried to do a bit slightly different. Everyone has their own style of podcast. For me, one of the things is to understand Ranjan Bhattacharya. And I know there's a huge amount of stuff that goes behind the person that makes what we see on TV, YouTube, etc., across social media. So I want to start with one of the big things, right? Is everyone has personal challenges, right? And we were talking off air before these. For yourself, one of the biggest things when I was talking about is, and it's probably quite common amongst Asian families, if I'm allowed to say that these days, is how did you become an entrepreneur and not one of the professions, doctor, lawyer, accountant, I think still mentioned, right? Those are normal ones people get into, but you went into the entrepreneur world. Please tell us a bit about it.
Well, I didn't first go into the entrepreneur. It was a battle, I guess. My parents were from a professional background. All their friend circle were from that sort of background. Same with family, uncles, aunts, all of that. So it was, you get a degree, you get qualified. All my 4 grandparents have degrees, master degrees. So we're from that sort of family, and you get a good career job with it. So there were no role models of people that do business. I remember my mum saying to me once that, businesses, that's what people do when they get redundant from a job. So they didn't get it. And at that time it was pre-internet, I guess, and I didn't really have those sort of role models. I always aspired and wanted to do entrepreneurial things. I was doing entrepreneurial things pretty much from 9, 10 years old at school, various bits and pieces. My parents were, saying get on with your studies and all of that, but I kind of like doing the entrepreneurial stuff.
You mentioned role model, and I'll go back to your parents. Was there anyone in particular that was a role model for you that sticks out in your head? If there was one person, is there a role model?
In life in general?
Life in general.
More recently, I think. I think in those days I didn't really see role models as such. I mean, everyone that I was exposed to was taking the professional career route. And that's what I did. I graduated In computer science, I joined one of the big management consulting firms, worldwide management consulting firms. They still are very good to work for as a first career. I did that for about 10 years, but all the time, the side hustle was far more my bag.
Okay, I think that's really interesting. So you sort of looked at collective, everyone else happening in the world, and then you were like, I'm going to take a bit from everybody. There wasn't one focal point.
Not really.
Not really. Okay, that's really interesting because a lot of people have different aspirations, whether it's Gordon Gekko for Wall Street or anything else. They always have a one focal point, but it varies.
I think as I said, business interested me, and even with TV at that time, I guess there were shows of people who did businessy things and did entrepreneurial things and led a good lifestyle. So I'm thinking in the 1980s, people who grew up in the 1980s will know about Dallas and Dynasty and all of that.
J.R. Ewing.
And all of that. And there was some
Bobby Ewing.
There was some good stuff there. And there was an episode of Dynasty where they were talking about lease options on a oil sort of rig. JR was always buying. There were all sorts of property deals that were being talked about and business deals. And the other thing I found interesting about TV at that time, particularly those high glam soaps, everyone wanted to do something. Now you see the Dynasty has done a reboot. It was on Netflix.
Wow.
And now they've done the reboot with the same characters, but in a modern day. But no one seems to do anything. But in the old one, in the 80s, every single cast member was doing something.
It's interesting you say that because I've got to be honest, my mum did watch a lot of that stuff and I ended up watching it. And when you're young, you probably, especially when you're growing up, you're probably not interested until you get into your 20s and 30s when it's like, oh, that actually makes sense. So it's interesting you point to those. So they were like the starting point.
They were, I always was fascinated. Any exposure to anything business-wise, I was drawn to.
I think it's quite interesting that you said that, where your parents were more professionals, working professionals, and you obviously went down that path initially, but with an eye of entrepreneurship. I guess, when did the penny drop for your parents in the sense, did they think, my son is not actually blagging it, it's actually a career? Because you said there was a defining moment where...
Well, I think they thought... particularly when you're in school and university and doing various types of businesses, they don't think it's very long term.
Yes.
And it's true that, like for example, at school I sold floppy disks. It's hardly a long term business. But I think what some parents people fail to realize, that getting into the habit of serially looking at what is the market opportunity. And then scaling up and ramping up the systems and the processes and getting the supply chain and selling that product or service to that market. Doing that in a serial way is what you become good at.
Yes.
So it's not floppy disks. When floppy disks, went out of fashion, it was something else. But it's the ability to do that serially that is the thing, the skill, if you like. Not necessarily the specific thing that you're doing.
I think you've hit the nail on entrepreneurship. What Ranjan's talking about, floppy disk, for people may not know what they are. That's how we used to save stuff from our PCs now you get USB sticks or many other stuff now. But that was the common way, wasn't it? When you used to stick them in.
That was, the little magnetic thing. And it teaches you the stuff you learn, for example, about branding and consumer psychology and consumer demand extends to all sorts of things. I'll give you an example with the floppy disks, for example. With what I bought unbranded Sony discs in bulk. So they were a good quality disc, but they were unbranded. So what you would see was that people had a psychological, and all my discs were 100% guaranteed by the manufacturer. Wow. But psychologically, people would want to pay more for a better quality of discs for different types of things. So if they were just storing a few games, they were happy with the unbranded. But if it was serious coursework, they would want something better. So I came up with this brand called Lifetime.
Wow.
And
This was in the 80s or 90s?
This was when I was at school.
Right.
So I had some stickers made up. I had some Lifetime stickers made up. And then I also had some other stickers made up in gold with Lifetime Gold.
Wow.
And we had the same disc. And I sold them in 3 different formats. There was the unbranded format, there was the Lifetime format, and Lifetime Gold.
Wow.
And people would pay double for the Lifetime Gold for their homework and all of that, and buy the unbranded ones for the games. But it gave all markets
Wow.
a product that they wanted.
Entrepreneurs, you're watching.
And by the way, that was exactly what Sony did.
Exactly.
They sold the unbranded ones, and they would brand them Sony and sell them double the cost.
If you're watching what Ranjan's told you, he's talked about a load of aspects, just to unpack it. He's talked about positioning, differentiating your product, and how to get it to the market so you can actually take full value of the pricing and therefore make money. That's what he's just talked about. Amazing. Going back to the point, I think you said at one point off here to me that your parents were hit was when they saw your advertisement or picture on the London Underground.
Oh, I was.
Is that one of the points? And your relatives talked to him, and then they were like,
I think, yeah. I mean, I was doing property all the way through my profession. I bought my first property as soon as I could graduate from university, and I was doing that all the way through my professional career. And I quit that and went into property after about 10 years.
Can I just unpack that? Because I've obviously heard a bit about that one. Your first property was while you were at university. Is that right? Or just after university? Just when you started working as a professional?
As soon as I got my contract of employment from Accenture, I took that to a bank and then got the...
So you got that, and then you basically rented out by the room and lived in the house. So you were making sure the rent covered your cost.
At the time, it more than covered it.
Wow. So that's entrepreneurship. So some people start at university where their parents buy the house. What Ranjan did was entrepreneur, self-made entrepreneur. He basically waited until he got his first job, got the contract. And back then, the mortgages were a whole lot different, how they gave you to him. They used the contract employment to give the mortgage, and you rented it out. It was very
strange. I mean, I actually was doing businesses all the way through my university career, so I had the deposit anyway. I used to do share trading, but I also, at that time, I bought in university. There was a big issue with Apple products.
Wow.
Macintoshes in the main. They were very popular among students and all the rest of it. But what they would do is they would sell the Apple Mac in the US for much cheaper than they'd sell the Apple Mac in the UK. Wow. And the only difference between the 2 units was the power cord.
Right.
That was the only difference. So I would buy Apple Macs from a place in New York, bring them over, and literally sell them as second-hand, advertise them in computer magazines in the classified ads, and make £500 a go on each one.
Do you know, it's quite interesting. My brother did something similar like that.
That was back in the late 1980s. 500 quid was a lot of money in that time.
My brother used to do it because PCs used to cost a lot more. So he used to do it with PCs. So he had a business set up and he used to do that. Actually, I forgot all about that. You just reminded me. And I used to watch him, and I was also still learning, and he made quite a lot of money on the side from entrepreneurship because he was quite tech savvy, a bit like yourself. He went into computer science. So the IT world.
That was brilliant. That was bringing in. I mean, it was so simple. I mean, I'm surprised more people didn't do it. But so I had the money for a deposit anyway.
Wow.
But but when I went in my contract of employment, because it's a very good company and all the rest of it, they gave me 100% anyway.
And then that helped you get your first property. And
I bought my first property with 100% mortgage, and I bought the next one a few months later because I already had the deposit for the first one anyway.
And that was a purely investment property, your second one?
Well, yes. A buy-to-let didn't really exist at that time.
It's changed over the years.
It's changed. I mean, those were the days of buy-to-let mortgages came in 1995, 96. Wow. So before then, it was about... you had a bank manager in those days. They'd actually know you, and you'd go in and have a chat to them, and basically you'd buy something as a residential property. You'd get consent to let, and then you'd move to the next one, which is your residential property.
As you can see, Ranjan's got 3 to 4 decades of experience, and he's just showing you the range of how he started and went through. So I guess going back to the thing was your personal challenge you overcame, the validation from your parents, even though you had that from your own mindset, you believed in yourself, which is so important. You've used that. It helped some of the family noticing that you're getting somewhere and they hope to convince your parents, because that's quite important for a lot of people. Then you got on to obviously doing the business.
Well, I
right?
think the thing with property is, yeah, I mean, I was doing property all the way through my professional career. And I think a lot of people hate their job.
Yes,
But I actually
exactly.
liked my job. I enjoyed it. And the side hustle through property allowed me to do that job better because I didn't really care about the politics.
Yes.
Because it didn't take long before rental income was more than my salary.
Got it.
So when I quit, it was basically because the job was really getting in the way of
Doing the
property stuff, and it wasn't worthwhile financially. I think one of the big mistakes people make is they quit too early without a particular plan.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there, and I was going to ask you that transition, because a lot of people, they start, if they're wise and they've got good advice, is if you've got a job and you work there, it's good to have employment income. And if you ever I would always get advice on how to structure that, because as you know, I love the old tax around there. There's so many benefits of doing it in that world, then moving over to full-time entrepreneurship. But there is a amount that you get to where you know your investment income, i.e. the return, the rental, is covering your expenses, and you can live where you can say, now I can put 100% of the time. How long did that take from when you started your first job after university to you were like, I've had enough of that now, I'm going to do it? Was it about 10 years, did you say, or less?
Oh, it was much less. I mean, at that time, we didn't really have that much information around, and I did some silly things in the beginning. I think the silliest thing I did was that, I mean, my theory was, when I looked around in management consultancy, I didn't really see many people over the age of 45.
Yeah.
I did wonder where they all went to. Because I do feel that even today, ageism is the biggest problem in all the isms that there are out there. And it's the one that will affect everybody. So I thought...
Sorry, on that point, that's a really good point. I love these, well, because these are the things we get into. Do you feel, even now, that ageism...
Oh, yeah.
Especially, do you know, I've got into the early mid-40s now, just when time's flying, but I've seen that with people who are now thinking very differently to when they were in their 30s, which was fearless. Now when they get to their 40s, depending on their knowledge and where they are and what income they're earning, they're a bit worried. And if they haven't done something like property or anything else, they're a bit at risk. Do you see that with a lot of people, especially with...
I think with corporate life, definitely. Corporate life is can be very ageist. You've got to be at a certain level by a certain age. Otherwise, you can stagnate.
I think on that also, a bit of a different topic, but it's really important about corporate world. From my perspective, it's not even sometimes where you've got to, because you can get there and the environment changes, but it's hard then to go to another organisation at that high level because there's less jobs, and then it becomes your network. And we've had all different conversations, and we might have different views. I also think it's not just ageism that's an issue, it's also your background can be an issue. Not for everybody, but I still see that as an issue, and everyone will have different perspectives on that. I see people, especially historically, a lot of minorities getting into entrepreneurship because they don't want to be in that environment where they are not in control.
Yeah, well, I think, look, if you go looking for something, you find it. And I've never looked for it, so I never found it. And, you know, I went into, when I joined management consultancy, the leading management consultancy firm in the world is McKinsey.
Yeah.
And that was headed by a guy who's of Indian origin. So how the hell can I complain? Yeah. So, you know, I think if you go looking for something, you go around finding it. If you want to buy a red car, you'll suddenly see red cars all over the place. You know, there are all sorts of, what you've got to accept is that, or what I accept is that not everyone will like me. You know, I've got to focus, and there's no rhyme or reason necessarily for that. But you've got to find the people that do like you, and you have synergies with, and go on and build whatever relationship you want to build with them.
I think that's great advice for any entrepreneur or anyone who's going through corporate world. I totally actually agree with that. I think there is different impacts and different issues, but I think one of the biggest things is the mindset, how you deal with it. Because as you rightly said, you always will have issues. And the people who give up and just rely on those issues, they don't get nowhere, because you've got to find solutions to our problems, because we only hear a finite
And here's
time.
the thing, I've never met anyone is a chip on the shoulder type who says, they're out to get me, or I can't do well because of this, that, and the other. I've never met anyone like that who talks like that who's actually successful, because they've talked themselves into failure.
Do you know what? I've had this a lot. I spoke to a number of people who've gone to degrees and things like this, and because of the challenges, and look, I faced challenges, I'll be honest with you, in corporate world, and I've gone quite far in some corporate world, but it has been a challenge from my background on the things that has been. But I've always taken that as a challenge to make me better, and you have to be even better than your people in your network or your contemporaries. That's the challenge, and that's how my parents have looked at it. And you get that, I think, the ethos from your culture that you're in. If you know you have to be better, you pushes yourself to better, to differentiate yourself, find solutions to the problems. And I think what you've said is in a nutshell, because if you can cry over everything, we've got to also look at what privileges we have got. Because if I compare this, and a bit of a different topic, but in different parts of the world, we may not have some of the opportunities that we have got. So it's looking at the mindset of what is available, not what's not available. And if you change that, you'll be in a much better position, and focusing on that, and focusing on the people that can help open those doors and really making a difference.
Yes,
I think that is really inspirational, Ranjan. I love that. I want to get onto your business challenges, right? And one of the classics is your foundations as an entrepreneur, because we sort of touched on this, and you'll see it, that personal challenges didn't come from an entrepreneurial background, in the sense his parents were more professional network, which has been the traditional route for many minorities or many people, to be honest, because that is vast majority. The entrepreneurs are always the small area, because by definition you have to do things differently, and it's much harder. How did you become entrepreneur? What was the foundation, the building blocks? And I think you've got a really interesting story on that.
Yeah, I think it's basically I was trying to my parents, when I was younger, my parents weren't that well off financially. My parents got much better off in the 1980s. My dad came from India in the 60s. Continued his studies here, getting MScs and qualified and all of that. So while I was very, very young, he was still studying. So his career really took off in the 80s. But when I was about 7 or 8 years old, 9, 10, that sort of thing.
Do you mind me asking what he did?
He was a project manager for Nortel.
Right, okay.
Project director, actually. He was facilitated big infrastructure telecoms projects.
Amazing.
All around the world, actually. So he did that sort of thing. But I found during my very early years that there's often, we can't afford this or we can't afford that, and I hated hearing that. So I always wanted to make some sort of money on the side, whether it was doing, and I always figured out a way to. I think a lot of people do little side hustles and all of that, but the thing is to scale it. You kind of try to scale up what you do, because I think that's a very, very important aspect, because otherwise you've just got pretty much a job.
I think that's one of the hardest, as you're an entrepreneur, what Ranjan's talking about is such important, great advice. Trying to grow a business, and I'll go on about this, to scale it, is one of the hardest things to do. And to get trust and get the right people to be able to give the quality that you're talking to people about or advocating, to make sure that mirrors through, is one of the hardest things, isn't it? I remember also, when I was a teenager, I benefited from the 1980s home computer boom. Right.
And I used to write computer games and sell them for different home computers.
You'll get along with my brother, by the way. This is what he did. He just hit his 50s as well.
It's probably, it might be in the same sort of era.
Yeah.
But then what I then started doing is basically buying the copyright from other kids who have done games and selling them on our brand. And And that was big. I used to do compilation tapes and discs for all the main home computers. Do 50 games on one
Wow.
cassette and all of that. And they would be big sellers. And I used to have massive problems with my school up the road here, because they used to wonder. I remember they called my parents in, because you had to get a chit to go out of school at lunchtime. And I had to go out of school at lunchtime because it was a mail order business. I had to bank my checks. And
That's a permission in writing that you're allowed to go out at lunchtime.
yeah.
Insurance for schools, hard work.
And sometimes you couldn't get. You had to have a legitimate excuse. So I had to kind of just leave school at lunchtime, because the banks are open 9:30 to 3:30.
It used to back in the day.
You're
yes.
getting we sell our cassettes and things for £9.95. So this is in the 80s. I was doing sometimes 150, £200 a day in checks.
While you were at school as a teenager. Entrepreneurs, I hope you're watching. This is how people get to that level.
And then you have to, and then you had to. I mean, I remember, I got caught going out of school, to bank some checks. Then they called in my mum and dad, the headmaster in the office, and all of that. Basically, what's he doing? What's he doing? How can he be doing? And the whole idea, the premise is this guy is doing something wrong, because this is impossible.
I think that you've hit the nail on the head of innovation, because innovation by definition means you're doing something different to the norm. And that's the entrepreneur mindset. And I find, and I try to speak to my children about this a lot, I think you probably spoke to your children about this, is it's not easy because everything's telling them not to be an entrepreneur. I still see this, even with all the knowledge and access out there. We're told do a 9 to 5 or 9:30, whichever place you work, do a job. That's the normal way. Anything outside that is a bit crazy. And we're missing, because our country, funny enough, the United Kingdom, is built on entrepreneurship. It is, isn't it? They used to say, a lot of people say nation of shopkeepers and things like this, but that's true. If you look how much small businesses are, so what you're doing is actually doing what the United Kingdom's actually known for, but now for some reason we've sort of gone backwards and we're sort of like, no, let's not be entrepreneurs, just get a job. But that doesn't actually grow the economy. The growing economy is from the entrepreneurs, because they create jobs.
Well, I think you're absolutely right, but I think the entrepreneurial mindset is not there with everybody.
Of course.
Sometimes it can be learned. Sometimes with a lot of people, with some people, it's just there. But it's just like not everyone's an athlete. Not everyone can do a 100-meter sprint. That is there among some people. So I can't do a 100-meter sprint. I can't sing. I can't play the piano.
Are you sure?
Some things I can do. No, but there's some people, are born with different things. It just happened to be that this is something that fitted very naturally with me.
I think what you've shown is the journey. And I think you were talking about one of the little famous stories about Monopoly and your first property transaction, how they are linked.
Yeah, I think I remember I got a Monopoly set, and I was about 8 years old, and I was addicted to that, really, because Monopoly teaches you a lot. Everything in Monopoly is a metaphor for life. And in fact, do you know how Monopoly was invented?
Oh, please tell me.
It was invented by this American professor who was a lefty nut job, and she wanted to show people how awful landlording and earning money from rent was. And she was actually horrified when people actually loved the game.
Are you serious?
Yeah. Eventually it was sold off to Waddington's, but she did it to prove that her whole point was that landlording, rent collection is because, if you think about Monopoly, you pass go, you earn a £200 salary, then you can land on a square that pay £100 tax, and you're constantly paying rent out to people. Unless you make sure you buy everything, develop the shit out of everything, and you be the collector of that rent.
Just let you know, no holds. That's what Ranjan's doing. He's telling you how it is. So we love it.
And it teaches you.
It does.
The rental income of passing go is peanuts.
Yes.
It is the property income.
That's like nice, no disrespect for it. That's like your salary.
Yeah.
That's how I look at passing go. The actual
That is
route.
your salary.
Yeah, exactly. And the journey. So you have to go past go the journey, bit of the old wheel, lobster wheel, rat wheel, whatever you want to say, rat race they call it. That's what it is. And it's how do you, the people that don't buy anything, they finish.
And the other
As
thing,
simple as
yeah,
that, right?
exactly. But the other great thing about Monopoly is if you look at the rule sheet, it's basically a A4 sheet that's folded 3 times and double-sided. So there aren't that many rules there. So what that means is that there's so many things that you can do because it doesn't say you can't.
Love it.
The rules say what you can do, but it doesn't say what you can't.
I think the big message there is about creativity.
And that is creativity. So, and particularly when you're dealing with 4 or 5 people, and you're playing Monopoly, the thing is to, you've got, I've got 2 greens, you've got 1 green. Okay, give it to me. I'll give you a split. I'll give you free visits when you land on there, and I'll give you 20% of the rent that I make off everybody else. And you do those sort of deals.
The financing as well with
You learn
deals.
so much. It doesn't say you can't do that deal in the rules.
So just for anyone who hasn't played Monopoly, right, you normally have is you buy 4 houses, if I get it
Everyone
right,
knows how to
and
play Monopoly.
well, you'd be surprised. And the red is the hotel after
Oh,
the
yeah.
4 houses, and you get different types of rent depending on which property you got, depending where it is, and it's commonly they've changed it now in many places. I used to create our own one with football stadiums, right? So we used to love it. Me and my cousins, we'd be doing this and playing, and we're doing Real Madrid and all the European stadiums that we would love to have. So we made it creative, something we enjoyed because the houses and the streets weren't for us as big. As you get older, you start to learn Mayfair, Park Lane.
There was a company, I don't know whether they still exist now, but there was a company that you could actually create your own Monopoly board based on your own things. So one of the things I wanted to do was, and I did it, you get enough properties, enough so that you can make your own Monopoly board. So you put your best one in your portfolio as Mayfair, and you put the grottiest one as Old Kent Road. Organise them all in the middle, and you can have your own Monopoly board made up. It's great. It's lovely.
I think Ranjan's absolutely smashed it for me in that entrepreneurship. There is not one size fits all. It's all in the mind and how you can make value. And he's just given you so much examples. And I know we're always running out of time. So I want to talk about something you mentioned. And I've sort of heard about it, but not as much as detail. You talk about something called capability paradox. I want to know why that is important and what does it actually allow you to do once you understand something called the capability paradox.
I think the problem that a lot of entrepreneurs have is that they're capable of doing a whole bunch of different things, and that doesn't necessarily mean you should. So for example, that can be in a functional role within a business, and it can extend to business areas themselves. So for example, I did a computer science degree. I like tech stuff. I'm capable of building my own websites, but whether it's a good use of my time to spend 3 days building something like that out, it's basically not. So just because you're capable of doing it, it doesn't necessarily mean you should.
I think we have this conversation. It's the same with finance and accounting and tax, and there's technically anyone can do their own accounts. Anyone who does do that, you're a bit crazy because you have to understand so much.
I don't think anyone can.
I'm talking about technically, you are allowed to submit your own accounts.
Yes.
Yeah. Whether that's the right decision or not, or the knowledge required to even do it properly and actually understand not just accounting, the tax, and how business works. That's quite a lot of different aspects, and many people don't really realise, and they sort of try to take shortcuts because of finance, how much money they've got available, or what they perceive is important and not important. I think you've sort of identified and quite clearly is stick to your capabilities or what you're good, and then either get the right people in-house or around you to be able to do the stuff that your capabilities or the return on your time is not worth it.
It's return on your time, links with what you actually want to do, what's driving you, what your purpose is, and all that sort of stuff. But it's not exactly where you described it. What I'm trying to say is you may be capable of doing something. The question is, should you? So just because you're capable of doing, as I said, web design or whatever, it doesn't mean necessarily you should do. People present to me, or I come up with, there are lots of business ideas that you can do, but whether you should do it is something that you need to think about.
And that's
I think, for example, I think I've been in and out of, say, property management, in terms of, okay, what is your business? If you're doing property, it is really identifying the deals, it's acquiring the properties, it's adding value to the properties, it's getting your money out of the deals. When it comes to ongoing managing of the property, is that the best use of your time? So people outsource it, but then it gets to a stage where it's so expensive to outsource it, and sometimes you feel you can do it better if you insource it. But then if you insource it, it's got to be with using none of your time.
Yes.
Because the minute you are doing your time, putting your time in managing those properties, then it doesn't make sense. So I think that's a sort of example where you have to actually think. In the beginning, I think it's best to get your properties managed by somebody else, outsource it. But there will be a stage where it's best to build that capability in-house.
I think it's the transition and knowing when to do that transition and having a plan in place, because there will be a point where that tipping point. I think that's a really good point. I think some of the other biggest thing that I know that you really advocate and you sort of illustrate is the network and what people you surround yourself with. And if you watch people like Ranjan and other successful entrepreneurs, this is the huge differentiator, because it's not how smart you are necessarily or how good you are at doing something. Often it's the people that help open the doors that make a big difference. So could you sort of expand how you built your network and share some golden nuggets for the audience? Because I find that is one of the biggest things that stops people getting to the level that they are capable of, because they haven't got a network or a way to access the network.
You've got to meet a lot of people, you've got to meet a lot of like-minded people and people who are punching above you as well. And you've got to, particularly when you're talking to people who are punching above you, you've got to find a way of being useful to them, so that they want to help you and liaise with you and do stuff with you. So that is very, very important. So I think my advice is, yes, get out, form your peer group. I know this is corny stuff, but your peer group needs to be people who are doing the same sort of stuff that you do and are a few steps ahead of you. And you make that peer group your normality. If you're around people that say, you can't do this, you can't do that, then guess what? You never will. It's as simple as that.
I think you've actually just put it to the point. Absolutely on point. For me, I always say, for me, irrespective where you got to, I always see how can I help someone first before they can potentially help me. I've always had that mindset. I think that's something my dad had, and I've seen that. And the reason why is, if you can't help someone in your first aspect, and from what I do, most people I can help. Some people are a bit crazy, you can't help them, they don't want to listen. But generally you can help people. That is huge, because that's where the goodwill builds up. You know, we're here because of goodwill, I assume, right? You know, if someone helps you, you're like more happy to go out the way to help them back. That's just human nature. And the people that are not like that, in my world, I wouldn't want to associate with them, because if you're helping someone and they never want to help you back or do anything, not you're helping them for them to help you back, but naturally as human decency is, if someone's helped you and they ask, oh, could you help us on this? You just help them. You don't, oh, I'm going to do this. No, that's what, for me, the network's about. But I find in the modern day, people don't seem to understand that. They feel that the world, everyone, goes back to what you said about the chip on the shoulder, they feel the world should do this, this, this. And I speak to so many entrepreneurs that have that mindset, and I'm like, I'm sorry, you're going to have to hear something that you don't want to hear from me. You're not going to be successful, not because you're not intelligent, you're talented, because of your mindset and your attitude. Your people are not going to help you, are they? You must see that a lot.
You can't expect to get on with everybody. And I think the thing with networking, I'd say my figures are pretty much consistent in that, for every 100 people you get to know or meet, you'll find one that you will go on to do some significant business with.
I think that's a fair ratio. You may help more people, but I think it comes down to expectations. I think people expect, and I did a post about this on LinkedIn and things, expectations, cut that out. Don't expect, see how you can help people, try to make it, and if anything does happen, great. If it doesn't, they have a good experience, because a lot of stuff in business is on goodwill.
That's what, it's one of the reasons I do the Baker Street Property Meet. I mean, as you know, you come along all
Love
the time.
it.
It's the largest property networking event in the UK. We get 300 people a month. And that is a way of building that right network, because 300 people turn up, and guess what? There's 3 people every month that I can do something with. It works really well. You give the value of the best networking event in the UK. People come, they enjoy it. You've facilitated that. You've put yourself out there doing that, and you meet and start to do stuff with an incredible number of good people.
Hi everyone, sorry to interrupt the podcast. Hope you're getting a huge amount of value from this. Just going to be quick, 2 seconds. First of all, to let you know, in the comments below, we have got links to free business guides that can help you on your entrepreneur journey. They include exclusive footage from Sky TV episodes that I've done, and a whole load of other content in there, whether you're a growing business, property investor, property developer, or if you want to love the fun of SaaS pensions. Please do look at those, and if you still want more help, get in touch. The contact details are below. I hope you enjoy the podcast. I think Ranjan's got rightly into our next section. We're talking about successes, and one of the biggest successes I've known, and I've seen Ranjan stuff on, is we'll talk on YouTube in a few seconds, but the Baker Street Property Meet. I am a huge fan, and thank you for always having us on there. Love meeting entrepreneurs. I'm, as you know, a bit passionate about meeting entrepreneurs, trying to understand their mindset. We're constantly learning, aren't we?
Yes,
right?
yes.
And then helping nurture, just giving them a bit of insight. That little insight goes so far, talking about goodwill, but also having a structure that you've set up. Because how long is the Baker Street Property Meet going for now?
Baker Street will be in its 10th year next year.
Wow.
10 years of Baker Street. But I ran my first networking event in 2007. So I've been doing it a long time. I had the bright idea of doing a property networking event in a shop that was between tenancies on the Holloway Road. And I had 180 people turn up, as well as the police, because they couldn't all fit in the shop. We only had 30 chairs.
I can imagine the parking.
People on the pavement. And I met someone at Baker Street just a couple of months ago, and she came up to me and said, do you remember that meeting you did in the shop? I came to that house. I was outside on the pavement. People still remember that and talk about that today.
2007, that was the wow. And you had 180. How did you,
180 people.
just, I guess, I know we've got so much value. The transition. So you've gone obviously from, you're doing it at a shop to a formal venue.
Oh, I only did that once at a shop.
Okay.
That was just once.
But it was probably a taste to see if it works. How did you communicate that out? Because a lot of people don't understand communication is so important.
I think when around about 2001, 2002, I wrote a book, and Dummies wanted to publish it, but I decided to go against it, because the problem with giving it to dummies, it's on sale in every bookshop, but you don't have any relationship with your customer.
Got it.
You got no idea who's bought it. So what I did is I took that book and I made it into a home study course, which I marketed over the internet.
Wow.
And we sold about 45,000 of those back in the day. So and I used to sell them at Property Investor Show and stuff like that.
So Investor Show, did you do email marketing as well back then?
Yeah. So because if you're buying it on the internet, then you've got their email address, so you know them. So if I'm doing an event, it was like a reader's event.
Got it.
So you read my home study course, Build Your Property Empire home study course. We've got a reader's event happening in Holloway Road. And so if I'd given it to dummies and it's on sale in Waterstones, I haven't got that information.
They've got the know.
So that's how. And even today, you come to Baker Street, I can introduce you to a few people who bought that book, and they can say, their journey started there, and they receive emails from me today.
For anyone's watching, people like Ranjan, and we've had other guests on, if you watch the previous podcast, is that they do something so well in the sense they communicate and use all the different mediums. We talk about social media, everything. They know how to get their message across. And that is a skill. And you've got to watch people like this to learn from them. There's nothing wrong. No one knows everything. That's why I do this podcast. I was saying the passion is to get people like self or who are successful in a certain field and use that knowledge, because it is transferable across all business. And many people never seem to put that together, and they don't invest time. They think, oh, I must know everything. I can't ask anyone a question. I'm asking people 50 million questions all the time, and it never stops. Well, moving on, I think it's quite interesting what you've mentioned around how you did the Baker Street. I also want to touch, before I get on to some of the property strategies, is that obviously you've been quite active on YouTube. I think am I right? It's over 65,000 now, or if not more.
About 65,000,
subscribers.
65,000.
And I, like many people I've watched, I learned a lot of stuff from Ranjan and permitted development, which we're going to get onto, through his channel. I didn't even know half that was possible. And that's where stuff like YouTube is huge. How did you get into YouTube? Because most people, we think YouTube, 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds, or historically, but that's not the case. Entrepreneurs at all different ages who know how to communicate have used the platform YouTube, and YouTube's been huge for you, right? How did you get into YouTube? What drove you to get into YouTube?
Bit of a laugh, really. I think my first video I did was 3 reasons why buy-to-let is dead, and I shot it myself with the camera, and I just edited it myself as well. I shoved it out there, and that got a huge amount of traction. I think it got more than 121,000 views.
When was that?
You'll find it on my YouTube channel. It's 3 reasons buy-to-let is dead. That was a few years ago now, but it's had more than 120,000 views. That kind of got me interested in it. I just found that, I've been doing public speaking in property pretty much since 2001, 2002. Used to speak a lot at property investor shows and that kind of stuff. And so it's an extension of that. You get, I did a video, it's amazing. You can speak, the largest audience I've live spoke in front of was 800 people.
Wow.
But, the video we put out last Friday went out at 6 p.m. and in 2 hours it had 3,000 views.
Wow.
And by the end of the weekend it was over 20,000 views. So the ability to communicate with a lot of people through YouTube is just off the scale.
I think it's the community that you've built up in your brand. You've built that up and people go to your stuff because they know it's good and it's the value on there. I think just to let people know, when Ranjan's talking about the Property Investor Award, he's talking about being a judge, which shows you what level he's at, that people like those kind of awards ask him to help judge and see talent. And that leads us nicely onto the Property Elevator, one of the Sky TV shows, with yourself, and we've had John Howard and others on here who've been on that. This is like the modern day property entrepreneurs, Dragon's Den, if I'm allowed to say that, equivalent, right? And it really makes people think differently. And I love some of the ways you cut the content on there to give your views and ideas of how you judged the deal, why you saw the deal, and what entrepreneurs should be looking out for. How did you start with the TV aspect? You went from YouTube, public speaking, TV. How did you make that transition? Because it is different.
I was actually at an event where I was on a panel, an expert panel, and I was sitting next to John Howard. And I didn't know John Howard at that time. And I thought he talked a lot of sense, and he obviously thought I said a few sensible things. And afterwards, he mentioned to me, we're looking at putting together this show. And that's pretty much how I got involved.
Wow.
We've certainly evolved the format. We've now collectively, we own the format. So we produce the show.
Wow.
And have a production company that produces the show, and we put it on the channel, which is the best way to do it. Really, you don't want to. You want to own.
You want to. What Ranjan's saying is owning the IP and owning all the aspects, and that is how entrepreneurs think. He's an entrepreneur. You mentioned John Howard, and if you ever have a chat with both of them, they're always having a few jokes. You'll realise that the charisma of the gentleman is next level, and I love that. And people who are not aware of that, they probably think, and I think you opened it with a little podcast. Oh, do you not like each other? That's what people think. It's not that. It's the way they have their relationship, and they know how to have banter. But you have to have an understanding to have that kind of banter with people.
It's more than that. I think I have a huge amount of respect for John. Yeah. What he's achieved, what he knows, his knowledge, and he kind of appreciates a lot of the things that I come with, particularly on marketing and that kind of stuff. So I know that he asks me for opinions on things, and I know I value his knowledge incredibly. So I think when you start with that. That feeling, of respect. Yes. I don't know whether he respects me, but I hugely respect him.
I know, and just to let you know, from my perspective, there's a lot of mutual respect, and exactly, he has openly said to me a number of times that, and that shows humbleness, and people, just like Ranjan's shown a humbleness as well, is that people know where other people do well. And he's mentioned about marketing, and I said, look, Ranjan's a bit of a marketing genius. I don't want to blow smoke. He's going to get a big head now as he said this. But this is the truth, because people have different ways of doing stuff. No one's an expert on everything. And the day you don't lose that humbleness, I think you're lost as an entrepreneur. You're going backwards. You're always learning, aren't you? Because something might work now, won't work in the future. Someone else in your network's doing well, and you're like, how are you doing that? Do you mind me sharing that? And that's the mutual respect, right?
The mutual respect, and that allows us to have a little bit of a joke, because he knows I love the guy, and I remember once I was at an event and I was speaking, and John was in the audience, and I think my talk was something like my top 10 tips on this, and I mentioned my title in my introduction as I was speaking. And then I went up to John with the notebook and pen, and he was in the audience. I said, you might want to take some notes. Obviously, everyone laughed. And then, I was at an event where he was speaking, and I was in the audience. And he says, oh, I don't want to do this mouse clicker. I need someone to help me. Oh, Ranjan, you come along and do it. He called me up, and I was.
He actually told me about that. Yeah.
So, it's good stuff.
No, but you've got to have that, because otherwise in business, we're so important, the personalities, and that's why I was touching about the personal side. You have to combine those. You think about it, anyone who's doing business for a long time, if you don't like the person you're doing business with, it's not going to work. As simple as that, right? You've got to have that mutual respect, a bit of banter, and understand what's happening. And listen, you have ups and downs. You're never always going to be 100% all the time with each other, but long as there's mutual respect, you know where you're both going.
But Elevator's going from strength to strength. We've just filmed season 7.
I saw that. I saw the old makeup.
It's the makeup. It's the best production we've ever done. It's fantastic. I'm really, really proud of the show that we've just filmed. It'll be on telly in June. The production values are really, really top notch. But the pitches, there's so much to learn from there, because the variety of pitches. We've had a 14-year-old on the show this season. We've had some people with significant amounts of silver hair.
Wow.
Everything in between. We've had someone looking for funding to build a 22-story tower block, right down to an HMO, 6-room HMO somewhere. So the deal variety is absolutely phenomenal. And the other thing that I love about the show, because there's myself, there's John Howard, Nicholas Walwork, Paul Mahoney, and of course Hayley Andrews. And they are all very, very successful people.
Wow.
And we're not all successful doing the same thing.
Yes.
So what I love about it is someone does a pitch, and I say, oh, I'm out, it's not for me. And one of the other guys sees an opportunity based on what they know and their angle and their perspective, and turn it into a deal. And vice versa. The other guys might go out, but I see something there that these guys have missed. And when you watch that show, it's greatly entertaining. But if I'm learning when I'm on it, from the other angels and what's being pitched and the opportunities and the angles they're seeing, it's impossible that people don't go away from that. Not only with entertainment, but learning stuff, how people think, how people turn what might not look on the face of it into a deal. They turn it into a winning deal. And how also people spot and say, look, this is a turkey, don't waste your time, go elsewhere. The learning is incredible.
Do you know, I always talk to entrepreneurs, I'll get your views and many other people, especially who are doing deals, because it's moving fast paced. What something worked 6 months or a year ago, especially in the current climate, may not work now. So you need to be able to assess and have an understanding what your exit's looking around.
Absolutely.
And people don't know all of this, and they definitely don't know how to structure. They should be coming to see people who understand the tax and accounting, because making a pound and keeping the pound are two very different things. And people concentrate on making the pound, rightly so, but they forget they've got to keep it.
No, I agree.
and they throw it all out. I think this leads nicely onto, which I wanted to talk to, and we've had a bit of a debate around it, is the model. And I'll talk about unlocking financial freedom, and this is what this Next Level Finance podcast is all about, is the different strategies. And I think you've done both, which I'm going to sort of talk about. One is having a trading business, which is the learning aspects that you do and all the rest of it for your training for commercial residential conversions and all the different courses, using cash flow from a trading business to invest in property to hold it. That's one strategy, and you've done the other one as well, which is, I think, more difficult often, is generating money from the property industry to invest more in property. I find the second one, I think, is getting harder with change of information, different property strategies, how are they generating the forced appreciation, the cash flow. So I want to touch on both of those. So first of all, you had business training, and you've been doing those for many years, and you've used the cash flow for that. How have you found that? Have you used that?
No.
No.
I started off, you can't train property unless you've done property.
Of
I
course.
did property first.
Of course.
And I don't think that's necessarily true. I got into property in the 1990s from a view that it has to generate cash flow. I wasn't interested in capital appreciation, because in most of the 1990s there was no capital appreciation.
Right.
So when I got into property, people weren't expecting any capital appreciation. So why would you bother owning a property? It's only for the cash flow.
Yeah.
So you're focusing on cash flow strategies which intensify the cash flow you produce from every square foot of property that you have, real estate that you have. And that was it. So it was very much a cash flow generative strategy. And it was also a strategy on managing the debt.
Yeah.
And you manage the debt through adding value.
Yeah.
So if you buy value, buy below market value from motivated sellers, so you're buying less than market value, and you're looking for opportunities where you can add value to them. So essentially, after you've done that, you can refinance that property and leave very little cash invested in the deal, or none at all. And then if the property is generating a high cash flow, then you're good to go again. So it quickly becomes a cash flow generating machine. And it is, I think, there is a perception among some that property is a slow business. And I think it is a slow business if you're busy doing something else. So if I'm a doctor and I'm spending all my time doctoring, then those sort of people will go out and buy some off-plan 2-bedroom flat, park some money in it. That's more wealth store.
Yes.
Playing the capital appreciation, because they've got cash flow from their income, or they've got cash flow from another trading business they're doing. So the property is just a store of wealth, and some place to accumulate capital appreciation, but they're not really bothered about the cash flow. If I'm not doing anything else, and I don't think, and I can't bank on capital appreciation, I don't believe it's going to happen. I always it's always a bonus. The strategy is on cash flow. then that's your focus. If you don't produce cash flow, then what have you got?
I think what I'm trying to break it down is there's different strategies, right? So if you're a full-time property person, right, either investor or developer, right, they're going to have a different strategy because that is your aspect.
Yes,
If you've got
that's
a
true.
job or a business, which I see a lot of entrepreneurs, and they want money to take ownership of their wealth, not just put it in, which not financial advice here, not just put it on the stock market and think that's going to do. They actually want to have assets and they want to invest in those. That is a different strategy. And I find most entrepreneurs that want to reduce risk, because when you did it in the 90s to now, I feel there is a difference.
Of course
because
there's a difference.
the property values in relation to returns, a cash flow is much harder because of debt and the value.
No, okay. Of course there's a difference. The property market and the circumstances, the rules, everything changes every 5-6 years.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean you can't make intensive cash flow today. You just make it differently from a few years ago. And a lot of this stuff is a myth. I mean, if you look at the last time buy-to-let interest rates were around about 6% was 2007.
Yeah.
In 2007, if you look at inflation-adjusted house prices, property prices today are lower than they were in 2007, but rents are up 30%. So people look at buy-to-let mortgages and say, oh, they're too expensive, too expensive. Yes, compared to 1 year ago. But when you actually look and compare it to 2007, we had 6% buy-to-let interest rates then. Inflation-adjusted house prices are down on 2007. Compared to then, but rents are up 30%. So how can that not be a good deal?
It depends on the numbers, right?
Of course it depends on the numbers.
But what you said is, but when I look at investors and I see the numbers behind what they do, right, I find that most people doing buy-to-lets down south, unless they bought well, right, but if they just went market value or tried to buy a property deal, to get the cash flow, is, especially down in the southeast, and that they have to do different strategies. And I think that goes on your point around knowledge is different.
No, but the way you asked that question, forgive me, is a bit nonsensical.
Please. Go on.
Well, you said unless you've seen figures, unless you buy it, buy well.
Yeah.
Well, of course. You know, if I want to do a trading business and I want to sell fans, you know, there's no point in me going to Curry's, buying a load of fans and saying, well, I bought them at market value, I'm trying to make a profit on it. No, I've got to buy them below market, I've got to buy them wholesale, haven't I?
Of course.
And then I make a margin on it. So if I'm doing property as a business, you're never paying market value because it doesn't, I'm in business. If you're saying in any business, whatever it is, if you're going to pay market value for your input, your raw material, then you ain't going to make any money.
I guess my distinction is if you're doing a buy-to-let, let's emphasize buy-to-let, and you bought it in the 90s, the comparison on the return when you bought it because of the value, because the value's gone up.
No, I know what you're saying.
And that when you do the numbers, I use a simple example here. I know this is not realistic in the southeast, but if I bought a property and the market value is 100k, right, and I take full finance of 75 grand, right, 75%, let's just assume that's things. I have to make sure my cash flow from it exceeds the cost of financing, the cost of running, and all the rest of it.
No, I get you.
What it used to be is previously, even at the value of the properties on there, because the rents in relation to how much you had to borrow were much higher, it was easier for buy-to-lets to be profitable. Now, if I go on Rightmove, Zoopla and try to buy a buy-to-let, most times that's not going to be the case. That's what I'm saying is changed.
Yes and no. I mean, okay.
That is what I was saying.
No, I know. Back then,
before I get schooled by the master here.
Back then, vanilla buy-to-let worked.
Yeah, that's the difference.
Apart from toilets up north, there's nowhere in the UK really. Anywhere where vanilla buy-to-let works will give you no capital appreciation.
Anyone up north watching this, Ranjan doesn't go past Watford Gap.
No. Not everywhere up north is bad, but there are areas up north which have had no capital appreciation in prices in the last 15 years. And that means when you adjust for inflation, they've actually fallen. So in those areas, yes, vanilla buy-to-let works, but you simply are not making any money long term.
Yeah.
The thing is, back then, I never did vanilla buy-to-let because vanilla
Yeah.
buy-to-let only gives you a small amount of cash flow. What I've
Absolutely.
talked about is cash flow intensification.
You're talking about what we call the Burr strategy. Yeah, a lot of times buying below
Yeah, yeah,
market
yeah,
value,
yeah.
forcing capital appreciation. That still works now, but you have to have
Yes, but
knowledge and
of course, no, but you've always had to have knowledge to do that. You buy well, yes, you add value, but the other part, what we're talking about now, is the renting out part of the
yeah,
BRER.
yeah,
Renting out does not work in areas where their properties are worth owning for the long term. It does not work if you just have a single family in there or whatever. It needs to be multiple occupation. And that can either be an HMO, a house in multiple occupation, or it can be a CMO, a commercial building in multiple occupation, where you take a commercial building and you split it into a number of flats, you keep it on one freehold and rent out each individual flat.
I think that's the key bit that I wanted to get out, right? It's the strategy and the knowledge to systemize it. That's going to be huge, because if you can't scale, you're going to struggle. This is what I see, because people don't understand that differentiation.
I think the thing is, I think there's a misconception in property. Where when I got started, I think it's true to say that you could pretty much buy anything, anywhere, rent it out, figure it out, and within a couple of years you'll know what you're doing. But that was an anomaly. Today, it's the same as any business. I wouldn't expect to be able to set up a care home without any training, without any idea of what I'm about to do. You know, we are in a more regulated industry.
Yes.
You have to be aware of a lot, and you have to learn a lot.
Yes.
You have to learn a lot about what the rules are, what you can and can't do. Well, that's for compliance stuff, but you also have to learn about the rules in terms of opportunity, to create those opportunities to add a huge amount of value to a property, and then also to rent it out for the best. All the time, I'm looking to optimize the capital value of every square foot of piece of real estate I buy, and optimize the rental value of every square foot of real estate I own. And that doesn't happen. The whole idea that you can just do that without any training, without any pre-knowledge, without being part of a peer group that know how to do that and do that daily, is fanciful. I mean, that's why people join a franchise, don't they?
I think well, you've hit the nail on the head now, because of how much information is available across the piece, because of social media, the internet, compared to when you started. That's my point. My point is, you could do something bland, vanilla, buy-to-lets, and still make money a lot of years ago, right? Generally, you would have to be quite bad. As soon as you got the money and got the finances stacked up, now you have to be clever on what you're buying, what you're going to do with it, how you're going to finance it, what's your exit strategy. You need knowledge and advice for that. And this is the big change. And because you've been involved all the years, you've adjusted as time's gone along, and your mindset's just think. But I see people still thinking they can do what before. Oh, I can invest in property, and they're not even looking at the numbers. They're not even looking at what they're going to do. And I ask them first question, what's your property strategy? They're like, I'm buying the property. No, what are you going to do with the property? Right? Because if you don't know the rules of all the different strategies, i.e. from a planning perspective, an accountancy tax perspective, you're going to just lose out. I see this so many times, and that's what I'm getting at, is depending on what you've done before, what you're going to do going forward, what knowledge base you've got, you're going to struggle. And that is what I see a lot of people, and that's why you get a lot of people coming and asking, look, I'm about to do this, because the numbers are much bigger. And the risk is much bigger now, more than probably ever before. And it's going to keep on getting bigger because of how the property market works.
Yeah.
And so if you've got no knowledge, you've got no understanding, you're risking bankruptcy. So one of our aspects is to make sure people have looked into this. Do they know this strategy? Have they invested time into knowing that strategy so they know the risks? Because one of the risks that people don't talk about is the mortgage. Right? The mortgage, you're assuming you're going to get rent every month. That is not the case. And any entrepreneur who has had buy-to-lets for a number of years or properties, there is a chance, you might have COVID turned up, loads of different variables. And if you haven't diversified that risk and understand debt quite a lot in relation to your property portfolio and how it's diversified, you're leaving yourself open. I've seen so many people get bankrupt, lose property, not because they weren't smart, they just didn't understand, or they didn't de-risk themselves or know how to diversify risk. And this is going to happen more, especially in recessions. This is what I'm seeing from property.
COVID was a once in a lifetime thingy, and I don't think it's possible to plan for that sort of event, because the way it was handled, there was really no rhyme and reason to it. But I think going forward now, that if you have quality property, the whole issue of voids and properties not being let is really a non-issue in most parts of the country, and it's down to we have a massive shortage of rental accommodation, and that means that landlords are able to choose the cream of tenants. So if your referencing is right, you've got the luxury of having more than five people for every one of your properties. So you pick the best, and you don't have any problems, and you have full occupancy.
I think that point what you said is huge. What you've just talked about, referencing the tenants, because what we can't obviously take into account is what may happen to them, or what their mindset the tenant is. Because if they,
you can.
I mean, with the referencing, you're saying, so you get a feel for it. But if people haven't taken all those checks, or if they're unlucky, you could get a tenant in, getting someone out with, we're going to get onto some of the legislation changes, no fault evictions.
You say that, but these are more extreme situations, and I think referencing, I've been doing this for 30 years. I've never actually been to court to evict anybody.
Wow, that's amazing.
Now, it is down to referencing, and it's down to picking the right people. So the people who are by and large in our properties are people who have got plenty to lose by going through a court process, by having negative credit histories and that kind of stuff. The people who have got nothing to lose by causing you grief, and they don't care about their credit history, they are the people that are likely to give you grief. So you don't put them in.
I think that's a really good point. And also, I guess, budgeting for something called repair, maintenance and refurbs. I think this is the area that a lot of people don't always think. On average, probably every 10 years, probably a property needs some kind of modernization or refurb, depending on what it's used. What's your experience been?
So what? I mean, yes, it does, but you always have to invest in making sure that your properties are in the upper quartile in that area, because what you then get is premium rents, and you also get premium tenants. If you let your property slide, you then end up in the lower quartile for that area. You're in the lower quartile you're in the cheapest one-bedroom flat in that area, and then you get the cheapest tenants.
I think Ranjan says, so what? I'm going to say what the answer to so what was. So what is because a lot of people, depending on cash flow, going back to cash flow, if they've been banking the cash flow, not putting some side for the repair and maintenance, I see this a lot, right? So if they're making, say, 200-300 a month.
But what you're seeing is wafer thin cash flows, and that's not. But what I've been talking about is high cash flows.
Yes,
you've got to be making high cash flows, otherwise there's no point.
Yes,
£200-300 on a unit is not enough to manage risk. Keep investing in the property and manage it professionally, and also make a decent profit.
I think the numbers are so important in this, and I know I'll go on back, I am a finance numbers person, but I think your knowledge, because you've gone through the transition, and also you got more pick of deals than unless someone's gone through the experience, built the network up, someone who's starting or different parts of the journey, it's very different. And it's knowing what your numbers are looking like, putting that maintenance or repair maintenance or refurb money aside, knowing that's going to happen depending on how old the house is, when was the last one done, depending on all these factors. People don't do this because it doesn't hit you on a monthly basis necessarily. It just come out once, or the roof's gone, or something else is gone, right? And this is the bit that I'm saying to people, cash flow, waiver thin cash flows a lot of people are running on those. And this is why the mortgage rates changing are going to affect a lot of entrepreneurs who paid over the odds in relation to the cash flow. The rent hasn't appreciated enough to give them that margin of safety. It just takes...
There are a lot of people that do a lot of things, and there are a lot of people that don't do things quite right. And, I think I've been training people for more than 20 years now, and, I train them in the strategies that I follow. And if you follow those sort of strategies, they've worked for me, they work for my students. And there are lots of people that get it, just get it wrong. A lot of people, particularly these days, I think there's so much social media hype and rubbish going on out there, and people posing in front of properties and we probably don't even own, and they and people watch all of that and get sucked into it and feel basically they feel like motivated buyers. They want to get in and do a deal.
Yeah.
I've seen people like that, and they don't look at the figures. You want to buy from motivated sellers.
Yes.
And you want to be motivated only by the numbers of the deal.
Yes.
Not because you want to be a property investor, so I've got to buy something.
You've hit the nail ahead. I've seen that.
I don't want to buy anything unless it's cheap.
Unless you're making value. Yeah, the force. And that leads us nicely because...
Every property is a problem.
Absolutely.
Every property is a headache. Every property needs time and effort on my part to think about. So it's got to be worthwhile. Why am I going to take this headache on if it's not delivering anything?
I think I heard from someone, and I'm trying to remember who it was, just recently, last few days. They said that the properties that have got the biggest headaches are the ones that you make the most money
of course
from,
it is.
but they have the biggest risk. And so the ones that have less headache, you're going to pay more, you're going to make less return, but they've got less risk.
Well,
on average, that's what they say.
I don't think less return is less risk. Less return means that you haven't got the buffer. It's actually more risky. And I don't think risk is. You make great returns from what other people perceive as risk.
Knowledge.
Because they don't have the knowledge.
Yeah, what I'm saying is the knowledge helps you overcome the bigger problems. Yeah. For people who haven't got the knowledge, they're considered higher risk. There's normally, but they're the ones that are opportunity.
Yeah.
So I spoke to someone talking about care homes. I've got a family member who's quite big in care homes, who's made a lot of money, but he's spent 20 years learning about care homes and has the knowledge because it's so technical. One of the things he saw was that one of his people went and bought a property because it was cheap, but didn't know why it was cheap. Went and paid $250,000 for £1 million property for great deal, but you didn't look at the judge's decision on that property, and it's got like one of those old rental tenancies where they are for life at this price and until they pass away, and they can pass it on to their parents. These are from the before Thatcher's time. They're still around, and the judge had advocated when they challenged, no, that's on that tenancy. I think their life in possession kind of aspect, and most people don't know. So that knowledge and then investigating to understand, are you going to see this out? If you're getting a few £100 a month for life, it's not. So you're going to have to hold that cash. Your cash is going to be on there on the off chance that they don't understand how to pass it over. They leave the world passing. This person's in the 70s, 80s, but they've got no headache. They're paying £300-400 a month rent for £1 million property. They don't care, and they can actually pass it to their wife, spouse, and the children, depending on meeting certain requirements. So there's a chance that the person who's bought it may have to have that money in there forever or for a long time, outsee them. So it depends on what their strategy is. So knowledge, understanding what you're buying, what strategy you've got, and what your exit is, whether it's holding it on or selling it. I know we're trying to simplify it, but property is in those steps. And there's a lot of details in between, which we're going to touch because it's a lot of value, and I've taken Ranjan's time up, and he's really thankful that he's given a lot of insight. I want to get on to a few of the fun areas because we're obviously running out of time, right? Technology. What impacts have you seen from technology? Because you've mentioned you're an advocate of technology from a technology background. Obviously AI, how are you using technology and AI?
I think it's always worth I guess with what I've always found, and it's changing a little bit now, is that the property industry has been a laggard with adopting technology.
Right.
One of the, I think, early on, very, very early adopters of tech and property management systems, and my property managers and maintenance people, we use phones and video a lot, and all of that. It's absolutely essential. I think one of the big things we were talking about referencing earlier.
Yeah.
Because of the shortage of properties out there and the competition for properties, fake tenancy applications have gone up fourfold.
What do you mean by that? Sorry.
There was a survey out this week. People falsifying something in their tenancy applications.
Right.
The biggest thing is doctoring bank statements.
Oof. That's fraud, isn't it? Really?
Well, I guess you can say that, but the thing is, people are in a situation, thanks to the government and subsequent anti-landlord rules and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
A lot of people have vacated the industry, and what you are finding is there's fierce competition for that two-bedroom flat.
Wow.
Particularly in the south of England and in high-value areas in general, for reasons we've discussed, vanilla Vital-let doesn't make sense. It makes sense to do an HMO, but it doesn't make sense for a landlord to rent a two-bedroom flat.
Yes.
So there are very few of those available.
Yes.
So if you want to rent a two-bedroom flat, what do?
Yeah.
The minute it's on the market, there are 20 people wanting to go for it. So people are going to desperate measures to make sure they have the best tenancy application.
Wow.
So,
wow.
So one of the things that we adopted last year, for example, was using external tenant referencing agency, which are set up for open banking. So when you move into a property of ours, you will be referenced, and the referencing agency will ask you for permission to link to your bank account through open banking. So then the referencing agency knows, that you have a fixed salary income. The salary you say you are is actually coming in, and it's been coming in for the last 3 months. They can see that your existing rent payment has gone out for the last few months. They can see that's happened, and they can see your disposable income and all of that.
Wow.
So you're having now to use the cutting edge IT to make sure you're doing your referencing properly to get those premium tenants. So that's just one example. And obviously you can't subscribe to open banking to do yourself. You have to use an agency that's set up for all of that. So that's just one example of how you have to be ahead of the curve on the use of tech.
Yes.
We talked a little bit about AI. We talked a little bit about, it's making people, you have to think about reducing the number of calls that you get to fix X, Y, Z, because they don't know. So one thing that we do when we do a checkout of a property, my maintenance guy goes there, and if it hasn't been done already, we'll create simple videos for things like, what do you call it? If the boiler loses pressure, repressurizing it, for example, create a simple video, and then literally print that on a QR code and stick it on the boiler. So you can direct people how to do things. Oh, right, the QR code's there, scan. We use a piece of, when people have a maintenance problem, we use a piece of software where they go onto our website, and it takes them through a decision tree. So is it a problem to do with your bathroom? Okay, it's to do with your bathroom. Is it to do with a leak? Then it asks you, what's the flow of water like? Because then you can diagnose whether, is it coming from the waste? Is it coming from the... Because a lot of the times with tenants, they report things based on symptoms.
Yes.
And you have to send someone around to figure it out.
Yeah.
But if you can get them to report the problem in a structured way, you can send the right person there
Wow.
with the right tools and stuff to do the repair first time. So it's using stuff to its full, really.
I think Ranjan's given huge value there. He's broken down how he does referencing, how he provides a service to his tenants, which is quite advanced. So note those tips down. I'm going to move on to the next area because time is against us, but that was huge value. Thank you for sharing that. I want to talk about a classic area. Did Brexit affect you in any of your businesses? And were you, because you didn't give me the answer earlier when I was asking, so first of all, has it affected any of your business, Brexit? Did it affect it?
Affected in the short term, I think because we did a lot of London lets, we had people, particularly from Europe. I remember someone called up the office the day after Brexit, crying, saying, "Do we have to leave the country now?"
Oh my
God! It was a little bit of a mess. I don't think it's done any good in terms of what people were expecting. But I think for property people, we want a good market for our rental units. We want a good market for our units for sale. That really comes if there's a vibrant economy. We've got the best talent around the place, it made a lot of sense from a business point of view. It hasn't affected our profitability. Obviously, you adapt to all the situations, but I think for the UK, it hasn't been the greatest move.
So, from your perspective, Brexit wasn't a good move. Is that fair to say? Or
I don't think it was a good move. We made it. You work. The same sun shines on everyone's back, so you make it work.
Absolutely.
But I think it was better pre-Brexit.
That's my view as well. I'm not saying in the longer term before I get all the flack on social media, because I always do when we talk about Brexit. I think in the longer term we don't know how it's going to turn out, but in the short term, look at the tax rises. They are linked to Brexit and they can cut it any way they want. If you lose 100 billion, which happens to be about 40 billion in tax, suddenly all the tax rises.
Why are tax rises to do with Brexit?
One of the key drivers, so I did an episode on Sky on this, was that if you lost 100 billion on your GDP, tax is underlying at 40% right now, one of the highest things. That means 40% less in revenue to the exchequer. Funny enough, all those tax rises or corporation tax, personal tax that they did in those budgets,
I know what you're saying.
Right? Those were not linked just to COVID, because COVID was a one-off impact. The actual driver was we lost GDP, and it's quite obvious we've lost it. So if you lost it, you have to replace that revenue. So therefore, they felt they can put corporation tax, because if you think about it, what did they say before Brexit? They said corporation tax will go down because we won't be linked to Europe. We can make it a tax haven in the United Kingdom. So why did we go from 19 to probably, well, for some people 26.5%? If you don't understand corporation tax, get some advice on that. We'd put some posts out on that all the time. But this is what's happened. So people don't realise the economy's changed because of that.
I think, I kind of agree. It's very difficult to say how much of the loss in GDP is because of Brexit and how much of it is due to other things.
I think the analyst can show quite a lot, not to the penny, but a rough idea. And there's going to be more costs coming, because when we bring goods into the country, we've been affected because we did business with Europe. They were our biggest trading partner. Now we've got a barrier. So not just a tax issue like VAT and all this has become complicated. Sending the goods has become complicated because you've got more cost to do business. And that's affecting us quite a lot. I see that with a lot of
I think the bigger
business.
problem is there aren't any goods. It is services, but there really aren't many goods that go out the UK.
It depends on whether you're doing online business, without getting technical. When you're
That's
doing
what
online,
I mean. That's a service of any kind.
yeah, but some people getting goods via online. It depends on how they get there. So even if they're doing it from China or India or Pakistan or the subcontinent, when they get it in, how they bring the goods, where they bring them affects your taxes. And this is what's causing a lot of problems, especially VAT and the compliance. Because before you could send them via the UK, if you use Amazon, even Amazon will put a load of extra controls because they have to. And this has made it complicated, very complicated, hence cost and also restrictions. So now you get hit when you order something until it comes to UK because you get an import duty which you didn't used to get before. Things like that, depending on how they structured it. So anyone tells you there's not been issues, there is. However, what happens in the longer term, just let people know, only time will tell. There was obviously bureaucracy. Is that going to actually benefit us and the trade deals? Only time will tell. But it's right now not been a positive aspect. I want to move on to another bit and I'll finish off on these fun things. You've mentioned obviously the property world, and we've talked about it, different slightly views. I take Ranjan's priority on some of those. The property world has changed, but one of the things which I've learned a lot from Ranjan was permitted development, hence king of commercial property. You've utilised those quite valuably and you taught many people about those. Recently, there's been more changes coming in on permitted development. Do you feel that's going to give the injection into more commercial properties being converted to residential potentially, or people using this mixed approach where they have commercial in some aspect and residential in other parts of the building like the uppers? What's your view on that? And I know these changes are new and there's loads of them, but the key ones obviously, you know, the bigger property you can do under PD. They got rid of some restrictions that the councils have been putting in over time. How do you feel that these things are going to play out? And be specific on the ones, because there's a whole raft of changes.
I think the commercial ones are going to be massive. I think there's a massive oversupply of shops, a massive oversupply of offices. A lot of the older offices no one wants anyway. People want grade A, modern offices these days. So there's a massive oversupply of these things. So it just makes perfect sense to be able to repurpose these. And the government is woefully short in terms of their housing delivery target. Planning permission system doesn't work. And this is a good, quick, efficient way of bringing on more dwellings into the market each year.
Do you feel there's going to be more entrepreneurs who use PD for bigger developments because they couldn't do it before because of the restriction of square face? There used to be, 1,500 square metres?
Yeah, but the way
it's gone up.
The ways around it, you do the first 1,500 square metres under PD and then you get planning permission for the rest. But now you just be able to do PD on the whole lot.
So anyone who doesn't know, and I would look at Ranjan Succeed in Property website and YouTube channel. Yeah. There's a huge amount of info about permitted development. That's what we call the 56-day rule for the lay people, that you can get stuff done. Hope I'm explaining it well. I know Ranjan do it a lot better than me, is how they do and then how they develop their properties.
It's building, it's all sorts of stuff. There's a consultation now on what you can do with houses, residential houses, in terms of extensions and loft conversions. That's going to be massive, particularly for people looking to do those extensions to make an HMO. There's the right
just
for...
on that one, apologies. You did a not really great video. I was watching it briefly. I was speaking to you about the wraparound extension. Yeah. Just explain that quickly for a few seconds. I know you've done a detailed video, as you can see on Ranjan's Succeeding Property channel. What opportunities will that wraparound extension do for people?
I think, ground floor single-story extensions are quite good at the rear of a property, and you could do an extension to the side of a property under PD. You can do one to the rear. But it's if you imagine you're going to the rear of a house and then to the side of the house, you've got this corner,
yes,
which doesn't make any sense. And to build on that corner, you had to do for a full planning application, which could be refused. Now they've just basically said you can, if you've got a corner of a building, you can do an L-shaped extension wrapping around the whole thing, which basically is fantastic for creating open plan kitchen, dining areas, that kind of stuff.
Is that come in yet, or
the consultation has been issued? It ends in early April, and then I think it'll be green lighted
before probably the general election potentially.
Yes.
Wow, huge. I wanted to finish off the last couple of questions. I think one of the biggest issues to the industry is being the change in property strategies. And this is what you've seamlessly done over 3+ decades, if I'm okay to say that. Right now, I know many people watching you probably know the answer to this, but if your number one property strategy, is it commercial resi still as your number one, or a hybrid of others?
I think I would answer it in a slightly different way,
Please.
which is the strategy has always been exactly the same, which is to own property. It's to buy property as cheaply as you can under market value, because if you're in business, you don't buy retail, you buy wholesale.
Of course.
So you've got to buy cheap, and that means buying undervalued properties from motivated sellers who need to sell quickly because they value a quick sale over market value. Basically, we buy any cars for houses.
Yes.
People value quick sale over market value. You've got to do that. Then you've got to find a way of adding value to it.
Yeah.
So then you get a double whammy of benefit, because you bought it below market value, you've added value to it, so you've built in equity into the project on day one, and then you simply refinance it and rent it out, and you rent it out, creating as much cash flow as you can per square foot, and that has been the same strategy since I started. Now there have been different techniques for implementing each bit of that strategy.
Yes.
So today, one of the best ways of adding that value is commercial to residential.
Yeah.
At other times, it was different strategies, but the strategy was the same.
Yeah.
The execution changes every few years,
Right.
depending on the rules and the opportunities and the types of buildings that are available and that kind of thing. But the strategy is the same. Buy cheap, add value, refinance, pull out most of your money, if not all, let out for on a high cash flow kind of strategy.
I love that strategy, and anyone's watched any of the stuff when I've talked about these, I look at what, as we said earlier, about not just making that pound, how to keep it. And when you do commercial resi, especially if you've got mixed, and the amount of opportunities is a huge way to keep most of your money. And this is a lot of people don't get this advice, they don't understand, and then they have a nasty tax bill which has knocked out all their money, depending on what they've done, and that could have been avoided. So always get advice. If you know a good accountant tax advisor, it can make a huge difference. I want to finish off the last one. Are we in recession or not, in your opinion? We're talking right now when we're recording this in February 2024, because time is moving so quick. In your opinion, recession or not?
We're in a technical recession. It is GDP's down 2 successive quarters, but we all know the figures aren't really the real figures.
Yeah, I agree.
The inflation figures, the way they measure inflation is so doctored year on year. There's no real way of comparing. It's a similar thing with the recession. You got to look at how GDP is calculated as well.
Yeah,
I mean, the classic example of, because most of the, because GDP is the measure of output of our economy.
Yeah.
So in the old days, it was goods produced in the factory and that kind of stuff. These days, most of it is services. So, for example, if you have a house and you bought it for £200,000 and it is now worth £500,000, and you decide to remortgage it, and you remortgage it to a £300,000. You've got a £200,000 loan, you now remortgage it, and you take a £300,000 loan. You have created £100,000 of GDP,
right?
Which is actually measured in the GDP figures.
Right.
So since remortgaging and all of that has been record lows with the high interest rates and all of that, so that input into GDP figures has not been there to the same extent. So there are all sorts of, and it seems ludicrous that creating money out of thin air through a property going up in value feeds into GDP figures, but it does. It's on the Bank of England website, how they measure GDP. It's a component. So when you actually, that's just one example, but there are loads like that where you can see that, and we can all feel what's going on in the economy. There is less is being produced, whether it's goods or services, and you know, partially Brexit, partially all sorts of other sort of issues.
I think the quick way I always check, and having the economics degree always helps, and understanding what it is, it's just your basket of goods like milk, eggs, and things like this. If you understand those are increasing, right, they are the best reflection of what inflation really is. Yeah, without getting into technical aspects called purchasing power parity, yeah, triple P. That is the acid test. You get 20 items. That's how real inflation is measured. Everything what we're seeing are, as you said, manufactured and doctored numbers. When you see milk gone up, you know there's a problem. Eggs, because that is a reflection of what's really happening, because you can't hide from those, right? Because demand and supply ultimately shows it through the price, right? I think my biggest question on this part for yourself is, on the property market, this inflation or the impact on the economy, historically, there's been a relationship. I don't know how much that relationship is now because of how people finance their properties. Potentially, because before it was a variable rate more model, now they have fixed rates. So the impact of inflation and interest rates doesn't hit straight away. I guess what you're seeing, has that started to bite people?
Of course, it started to bite people, but I think the property prices normally lag behind inflation by a few years. Yeah. So what we will see over the next few years is that will catch up. Yes. Because property prices really aren't going anywhere. Yeah. By them not going anywhere, it means they've actually come down when you adjust for inflation. Yeah. Over the last few years, because £100,000 is not the same as it was 3 or 4 years ago. Yeah. But £100,000 property is still 100,000. Yeah. So it'll only take another few years before people think, well, that £100,000 is rather cheap. Yeah. And if they're getting 5-6% wage rises, then the affordability of what they can borrow goes up. So therefore, and there's such a shortage of homes in the UK, you know, that's why one of the things we can pretty much rely on is that the 5-6 year future for property prices is very, very good, because debt, of course, doesn't inflate. It actually inflates away. Property prices will inflate upwards in over a 5-6 year period, and that's because we ain't going to build anywhere near the number of homes we need in the UK, and the feeling that people will have on the value of £100,000 will change. It's already changing, and will change even more.
I want to unpack what Ranjan's given unbelievable value, and we're finished on this with our longest ever podcast, but it's been so much value, and I'm really humbled that Ranjan shared it. When he says inflation is your friend, really, for debt, is because if you take a 100 grand debt, say out, that 100 grand debt in the future is worth less because value of money has dropped. In your favor, it's worked in your favor because in real time, the prices of rent and your property have increased, but your debt's actually gone the other way. So if you own property, especially in the short term and medium term, inflation can actually help you. It's only the people who are trying to buy property, who are not on the ladder, they're going to feel it, because when they exchange their money, i.e. cash, even if it's in the bank account, for property, they're going to feel it because it's going to be much higher, because cash is now worth less and its buying power is less. I think that's...
And yes, that is what's going to happen. I think we're not, and we're also in a period of stagflation. So we got a recession, and this whole idea that we're in a recession, so Bank of England have to cut interest rates. No, they can't just. There's no easy answer to that, because otherwise you'll just end up with what happened in the Liz Truss regime. You can't just, if you cut interest rates, then no one will have confidence in the UK, and everything else will tank. So unless there's a massive growth in the economy, or the Federal Reserve in the US starts to cut rates, then we can't do it out of line with that. The minute we go out of line, then obviously no one wants to invest in the pound and buy pound bonds and stuff like that. So we can't be too much out of sync from the States. So the whole idea that rates are going to be cut just because there's a recession is a bit fanciful. They can't do it unless the Fed do it. We'll be too out of sync with everybody else. So what we will have is a situation where there is no growth, but there's actually a little bit of inflation. Because the other reason they can't cut interest rates is inflation is still, the official figure is still double what it should be. So they can't cut it yet. So that's going to cause a period of pain. So, and I think we will see some job layoffs and stuff like that. We'll see people feeling less wealthier than they felt a few years ago. And what that also means is that when people feel like that, more people want to sell property. You have what's already happening now is properties are taking longer to sell.
Yeah.
When properties take longer to sell, there are more bargains and motivated sellers out there. And I think the thing that people need to remember about recessions is recessions always see a transfer of wealth from people without certain knowledge to people with knowledge. That always happens every time.
It's ownership of assets, isn't it?
It's
It's one of the key drivers.
Of course, it's ownership of assets.
The people who
yes.
own the assets
yes.
always win.
Yes.
Well, I say always win. Majority win, provided they know
it's
what
back to
assets.
the monopoly again.
Yeah.
But it's the recession see a transfer of that.
Just
So do you want to be at the which side of the transfer fence do you want to be on?
And that's why you invest in knowledge. Why Ranjan's talking about the US dollar is because that's the reserve currency of the world. So ultimately, everything is run through the US dollar. So if the US dollar, they say the US market sneezes, the world catches a cold. That's why. Is that going to be the case in the future? In the UK, yes, because we're still quite linked. Other places are changing their reserve currency to the one, i.e. The Chinese currency, if that's right, if I got that one right. And that is going to have a knock-on effect. How long that's going to be, God knows, but it's definitely changing. So it may not always be what it has been for the last, say, 40, 50, 60
It's true.
years.
But
I've started to see this change.
No, I know. I do agree with you. But I think the great thing about UK property is the fundamentals. We can actually look to a 10-year horizon because there's no cat's hope in hell chance of building supply matching demand in any way.
Yeah.
So the fundamentals are there.
Wow.
You go to places like Dubai, they're building buildings the size of Canary Wharf every other day, but there still isn't the population to fill them all.
I was having this debate actually on Dubai, and I know we've gone on a bit of tangent, but Dubai, from my understanding, they're having to constantly buy new property, build new properties because of the heat. The properties deteriorate a lot quicker in hot climates than they do generally in cold climates. And I found with Dubai properties, a lot of people, unless you've got the AC on constantly, they're having new, have you seen so many new plots are being constantly built? But if you go back, say, properties in the late noughts, look what's happened to them. And people aren't doing that. So I've had quite a few conversations with developers, investors, and they've said, unless that property is going to be tenanted or run, if you just leave it there, it will dismantle. And I know this because we've got family in Kashmir, Pakistan. When we go out there, I see that happening. People don't realise the heat aspect has a different impact. Even how those properties, they tend to be different to UK properties. They're a bit more open space than UK properties, which are like a closet job these days because they want all the heat in. They want to keep the heat going out because the heat is generally warm most of the year. But it is actually affecting the material of the properties.
That I don't know about. I'm just talking about the supply and demand aspect of it, where what I'm saying here about the UK, because our economy is so lopsided, particularly to the south of England, and the housing supply is, it's impossible that it will, any of the targets will be met. Supply demand will be in equilibrium. For a decade at least, so you've got that near certainty in the UK.
Listen, Ranjan, longer than we expected. So huge value from Ranjan on this, and I'm really thankful. Thank you, Ranjan, for the podcast. Anyone, we're going to put Ranjan's details in the comments below where we post it across social media. You want to connect with Ranjan, get more info if you're not already. I would definitely follow his YouTube channel because it's unbelievable value, and hopefully you got value from the Next Level Finance podcast. You have to love being an entrepreneur and unlocking financial freedom. Thank you for listening. I really appreciate it. Hi everyone, I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the podcast. We're doing this to add value to your entrepreneur journey, which is have a quick catch up on this, is that just to remind you, we've got free business guides in the comments below. They got huge value in them for property investors, property developers, SaaS pensions, and if you've got growing trading business as well. If you, after you consume those guides that have got exclusive Sky TV episodes in them, please do get in contact with us. The contact details are there, and we can help shape your entrepreneur journey and unlock financial freedom. Thank you so much.